ET Editorial Director Bodhisattva Ganguly to join Ms. Sitharaman on stage. Ms. Sitharaman, Mr. Ganguly, the stage is all yours and we all are all yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Cyrus. Sorry, I slightly mistimed my arrival on stage, but never mind. So let me just get straight to the, to a set of questions. In spite of all the digital innovations, I'm actually relying on a very old-fashioned piece of paper, which I've printed them out, but I'll just ask them. So, Finance Minister, you've just returned from a trip to the US. What is your sense generally of the financial sector there, and do you see a contagion risk from the financial sector in that country and in the Western world in general?
Contagion risk, if you go by the rule book, if all central banks are responding to the Fed's action almost sequentially, yes, and as a result you find Europe being more exposed to the chance of coming under recession. But I think since the last 1.5 years, gradually our central bank is also decoupling itself. Not that it was entirely linked with the US Fed even earlier, but post the pandemic and post the Russia-Ukraine, the sense that all central banks would look for a direction and move towards that direction sequentially is clearly disproved in the conduct of many emerging market central banks, not just India. So for India, I would think the contagion risk is not really a problem, but the risk is there in the sense when markets to which you largely exported are coming under recession, then the demand is going to fall, your exports are going to suffer. So that risk is definitely there. I'm not eliminating that. But the contagion risk, usually linked to the conduct of the central banks, I would think is not there for us to face.
So let me just take off from a point that you made on the central bank, and as you said, while there may have been some belief that central banks in emerging markets in other parts of the world would mechanically follow the Fed, that is no longer the case. I think the RBI also recently paused its rate hike. Of course, they have explained that their recent decision was a pause and not a pivot. But do you think, in view of the latest, the latest inflation numbers, both retail and wholesale, that that we've hit peak interest rates?
That's not for me to say at all. I have not even given indication whether my feeling is that or anything of that kind. I think it's only fair to give RBI its terrain, and it's for them to take a call, and I think most of you all are very happy with RBI having paused. So I really can't speak differently, can I? I want all of you all to be happy with the way in which RBI has responded. So no comments on that, because I think RBI is getting the sense from the ground, getting the sense of the urge for us to move forward in terms of growth, and also seeing how the implications of a recession elsewhere can hit us. So I think we should be confident that the RBI will take the right decision for the next round as well.
But if I can ask a question, I mean, we've addressed this before, but we enacted a law some years back which sort of explicitly said that price control was RBI's. By law, it had to explain, for example, if it fell below 4%, and there was a band of 2 to 6%. Now, there was
not each time, if you have consecutively 3 times.
If you have missed 3 times. But what I was coming to was that given now this was obviously before the COVID crisis, before the Ukraine situation created, all kinds of disturbances for the economy. What I'm getting at is that, do you think the law kind of binds RBI's hand in the sense and gives it and imparts a bias towards raising interest rates when other circumstances, such as, let's say, difficulties in the world economy, crude oil volatility, weakness in the Indian economy, those might become secondary, and inflation becomes the overriding factor. Therefore, they want to. Is there a need to revisit that law to give more flexibility to the RBI?
Well, the factors which determine what happens today are very much more extraneous. Post the war, post the pandemic, post the supply chain related issues, and so on. Even as it is with the law existing, I think both the administrations and also the public at large and industry in specific are not obsessed with the law. That, oh my God, RBI. And it's not very many times that RBI has come in a situation that it had to write a letter to explain itself. Just that one instance.
Yeah.
And just that one instance was also purely because of the way in which global markets were performing. So I think, like many things in India, you have a law, you have an institution which has to follow it. You also have the circumstances where they are not followed to the last word. But I think all of us are, Indian democracy is mature enough to understand why it is happening. And it doesn't warrant at this stage for me to go and meddle with the law.
Okay. Just coming to your future challenges and inflation for the rest of the fiscal, do you think, let's say, OPEC Plus's decision to cut output, would that, plus the possibility expressed at least in some forecasts, the monsoon may be on the weaker side of El Nino, would that put pressure on inflation?
Well, every year, every season, this question comes before us. And every season, which is normally predictable, it comes before us. Now we've seen such wonderful, historic, unpredictable events happening where we don't have a template to deal with it. But we've come across and walked along and gone past them as well, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a war, and so on. Now, El Nino is also not something which is happening this time for the first time. To ready our economy for meeting that kind of an impact in the monsoon or not a happy monsoon also is part of our preparedness. So there's no new element to it, but yes, one has to be cautious.
So we obviously have a number of state elections. There's one in Karnataka next month, elections at the end of the year, and of course the general elections in a year. So do you see the possibility of an upsurge in populist pressures, particularly, for example, particularly referring to the demand and the decision by state governments to revive the old pension scheme, and that looks like emerging as an electoral issue. That's not the only kind of populism that one can do, but that's kind of the thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think this upsurge of populist demand is not from the population. It is more from the politics, from the political parties which think, I have no other card to win the election, so I need to throw this. All the temptations to the people. There are instances of states where even after splendid freebies, parties have not won. That's not to say freebies don't seem to bring in any value addition. They have their place, and not a very happy place, I would say, because it burdens the economy, and most often these freebie givers don't even honor it in full. So I think some states are very prone to it, some others not in a big way. So the debate on freebies is something which happens when the freebies are fantastic enough, and the budgets can't support it. But if you're referring to the OPS and NPS debate, elections are happening. May not be for me to now say, but the last few months, and I'd like to believe post the budget, the discussions on NPS and OPS is a bit subdued. I'm not giving credit to anybody, but by then, I think by now, if I can say it so, the realities of the complication in this issue, it's not a black and white situation of, I don't want this, I'm going there. The implication of moving, the complications involved in the moving are all now coming apparently for everyone to see. So in the current set of elections, I don't think that is coming in for the debate. Also because we've announced during the passing of the finance bill that we have formed a committee headed by the finance secretary to look into how issues are panning out in the OPS and what are the kind of things that stakeholders want. So the consultations are going to happen. Based on that, whatever has to be looked in as possibilities will be looked in. But one thing which is somewhere at the back of my mind, returning to OPS is probably going to be extremely impossible. It's not for A state or B state. Every state will be burdened much more than what they can take, even within a matter of 5 to 10 years, and after which it will balloon. So what kind of a consultation, what are the inputs, the Finance Secretary and his team will have to see.
So I think the one solution could be perhaps a guarantee element, some kind of a guarantee element woven into the NPS. Is that something which you would look at?
Finance Secretary is here. I'm sure he's hearing your suggestion.
Maybe he can address it when he speaks. Yeah. Just wanted to ask you, before, as you came in, I think you caught the last part of the discussion, which was on private sector capex, and that's been one of the issues which one has been grappling with. It is not picking up to the desired extent. Is there, I think the private sector is richly represented here in this room. Is there something that you would like to tell them or make a pitch for?
Well, for once, I'm going to talk completely in favor of the private sector from their side. If after 2019, bringing down the corporate tax and giving a time till March 2023 to expand businesses or set up new businesses and everything else, if the world had been normal, I think to be a bit tough and expect saying you have not really come out in flying colors would have been a reasonable argument. But if immediately after 2019, October when this was announced, September end, you had the pandemic and how? And after that you also have the uncertainties of the war. But despite all this, I still can see many expansions happening, new investments happening. Otherwise, why will there be such a impactful impression about India and its attempts to bring in renewable energy? Look at the keenness with which people are coming to India to set up in many fields, whether it is your semiconductors or looking at renewable energy or looking at rare earths. And also because the policy per se has now opened up even space sector. I was there in a different context releasing a book. I did speak about India's public sector enterprises policy, which actually has opened up so many areas in which private sectors can come and invest. In fact, there's no area left without the private sector coming into it. So with all this, I can see, otherwise India's space industry, even as it was doing very well, wouldn't have had so many private parties coming in and saying, we would like to use the facility. So it is happening. But I don't know from where this trigger has come about. Some data is also flowing, saying Indian private sector is not yet ready. I'm sure they're ready. Aren't you? Why? I'm supporting you. Why? See, that's the problem with Indian industry, private sector. They don't, yes, we are there. They don't say that. They gently, on being asked, would clap and...
Sure. So maybe one reason why, it's not specific to any particular private sector, but it could, again, this question will be asked at any time, but there is perhaps anecdotally, there seems to be a sort of a rise in the number of income tax notices, the GST tax evasion. While no one is supporting tax evasion, obviously one needs to crack down on it, but there impressionistically there seems to be, a large volume of notices going out, various sectors being investigated, being probed. Earlier it was there was a question about the ED, but it's not just, it's also IT, GST, etc., raids and searches. Could that be a deterrent?
I think the industry knows where the raids are going. Let me be very clear. I'm not justifying it. I remember in 2019, I was pilloried saying, oh, tax terrorism. You questioned me several times on it.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that that word is not being used, that expression is not coming about now, and therefore there's no terrorism. I'm not saying that. There can be some harassment here, harassment there, harassment some places. But today, when you're looking at deep data and AI-driven, faceless-driven systems, the fact that trails are coming out, obviously, and the trails going to shell companies are there in your face, I can't see how the CBDT or CBIC can remain mute spectator. How the boards can remain a mute spectator. When data is active, it is showing. And if brazen misuse is happening in some sections, it's only natural that you should go. And I'm glad, and efficiently if they're going, I'm glad. Because that has to be plugged. So those who are genuinely and rightly paying taxes will lose faith. If there are, there are pictures put out. Shell companies, about 300 of them, operating in about a 50 square meter area with just one table and chair and getting refunds to the extent of about 400 crores. Would you expect the department to sit quiet and watch? Obviously they'll go. So I don't want this to be a conversation eternally about India's and tax authority. Tax authorities are now sitting up and being ready to answer as well. But if you're going to be quiet for fear that you'll be accused of unleashing a certain kind of terrorism, the inefficiencies will only perpetrate. We don't want that. We need to appreciate people who are paying genuinely the tax, and those who are misusing it will have to be called out.
I think the public...
This audience is very, very sure that they're not happy. And they want to convey that we are not happy. Tax terrorism, investment, whatever be the topic. No. And that's why you get this impression that no investments is happening. They're all giving you that picture, but they're investing.
Okay, let me come to two of the biggest reforms of the government, GST and IBC. GST is a success, possibly for tax evaders, too much of a success. But IBC seems to have encountered various problems. I mean, it's sort of caught in the Indian litigation maze. What are your views, and are there...
No, IBC has its problems in terms of the benches in the NCLT and NCLAT not having adequate members. Timely filling up of vacancies is not happening. It's not because we don't want to. The layers of decision making which is involved in it, only to track the right people so that they're efficient, they're transparent in their operations or in their decision making. In that, a lot of time gets consumed. Because appointments are jointly made by the court and by the government. Getting the dates, sitting and having a list of people and then having their IB and other thing clearance obtained does take a time. And that is primarily the reason. The Act per se is robust. It's been updated with inputs coming from industry. So we are periodically having also awareness built on it. The professionals are also being given good training so that they don't delay the process. In spite of all that, if there's a problem, I admit to it, we've not really been speedily filling up the vacancies in the benches.
Is there, there's been some debate about, reforming India's capital gains tax, or basically raising capital gains tax on equity, because generally the government has been phasing out all kinds of tax exemptions. That's very clearly, the direction of tax policy, and that's the way to go. So what are your, I mean, I know you've recently issued a denial on capital gains tax, but but is that likely to be the direction?
Well, at this stage, we are not having any proposal before me, and that was a fantastic news flash. And I have quite a few media. I'm sitting with the media now. I would have thought any such flash or any such breaking news also gets one input from the concerned ministry saying, you know, this news has come to us, we're going to put it out, what's your view? And we can say, no, it's not happening, or we can always give you a clue that it may happen, but don't quote me business. This particular news, there was no cross-referencing with the ministry at all. So end of the day, of course, insisted that we come out with a clarification, but somewhere there is huge speculation outside. And probably that speculation expects, even as it's being a speculation, that more the number of times the speculation happens, the government will be moved to do it. The government will do it when it wants to do it, but at the moment there's nothing. So I don't want to add to the speculation.
Okay. Just wanted to ask you, you know, a couple of questions were, there was a reference to gender budgeting in earlier on speeches. Do you have, is there any such plan in terms of, there's also a suggestion from Niti Aayog. Is there a plan to, for gender budgeting that you have?
I don't know how to answer this question. Because, well, I'm coming fresh from a meeting where this was also discussed, I mean, mentioned briefly. Yes, I did. When I was in the Commission, National Commission for Women, I had taken up this on behalf of the Commission, prepared a report, and submitted it to the then Finance Minister saying there should be a gender budget. And I'm sure the audience here is well informed that there is no separate budget for women even under gender budgeting. It's more to look at and slice the budget details to see how many actually benefit women, how many are women-centric, how many have women and men component, and so on. It's more looking at it from the prism of women. And is it welfare, is it empowering, all those cross-cutting. There's been several decades of talking about it and also looking at aspects of it. But I think we've now grown beyond what gender budgeting of, let's say, 2000, 2001, 2 had to say. We are now looking at women-led policies, meaning where you give a prominence much ahead for women to take it forward and so on. So there are so many ways in which you're reaching women to empower them. It is not just the money which is going to the women, but also those other paraphernalia which is so important for women. So I'm not sure in the very typical lexicon-related gender budgeting there's anything happening. But there's a whole lot of things happening for women, women-related policy making. So that's how I'll put it for now.
And does that look at, does that envisage any kind of tax concessions for women in terms of lower tax rates, so on, or is that?
I think we're already giving some concessions.
You are giving a concession.
And also we've come up with the special bonds.
Yeah, the higher interest rates.
So, yes, as and when it should happen, it's happening already.
Let me just ask you one or two sort of last questions, or what do you see are the necessary things? I mean, we are at about. I mean, there are various projections of growth rate, and obviously we are the fastest growing economy in the world. But it can be. But our growth rate is essentially about around 6%. It could be 6.2. What can we do? But given India's relatively low per capita income compared to, let's say, China or even Mexico, what can we do to get to 8% or 9%, which could be the country's true potential? I know we are coming out of a setback of the 2 years of COVID, but what are the things that the government can do to get out of that?
If you're looking at number only, 6.2, 6.3, or is it going to be 8? And if it is 8, it's better for India. All that is fine. And Honorable Prime Minister constantly looks at areas in which you can have greater activity. Areas not geographical, but even in terms of sectoral, in terms of industry, in terms of MSME. This particular budget, I was glad that Prime Minister himself came up with look at SSGs, they are in the rural area, women, and for them to have greater credit, greater empowerment for the produce that they produce, will you give them greater marketing assistance and also expertise to make their products better and so on. So if that is one area. The other area you're looking at, because India's economy is so driven through the small and medium units, and also looking at those traditional people with handicrafts in their hand, literally that which they create using their fingers or tools or whatever, the Vishwakarma related. That's going to take the economy straight to the doorsteps of these people. And that is why post the budget, when the Prime Minister himself explained the budget to the people, he used one line which was very attractive. And I think it was absolutely the pointer towards what we have, vanchiton ko variyata. I'm not good in my Hindi, but that captured my imagination. If you really pull up those who are skilled but yet lying somewhere in a corner of the country and give them that kind of an access. Now what this ONDC does, the Open Network for Digital Commerce, what account aggregator does, what the QR code based the NPCI does, are all very indicative of small tools with which you are approaching smaller people, but all of whom make a wide canvas of people who have to be activated in the Indian economy. If they are going to be activated and if they are going to access the global market through digitization, and that digitization speaking to you in your own language. It was amazing in the World Bank meet where the IMF organized a digital public infrastructure meet in which experts were all seated. They were talking about the achievements of India, not just the variety of things that you brought in digitally, but also the scaling up that has happened. India scaling up is just impossible if you don't take the diversity into consideration, the languages that are available, and the diversity in development parameters as well. Some very backward, some not so backward, some very well developed. All of them equally are at ease with digital. These are the ways in which I think you are making sure the economy gets vibrant at every pocket. The attention given to the aspirational districts. These are not small steps. These are going to improve your, indicators. Your GDP base is going to widen because of that. And if that widens, and now that the population is young, you expect to have per capita income going up.
Thank you, Finance Minister.